Good afternoon, and welcome to our Learn from the Best masterclass on clear leadership and clarity. My name is Stephanie Nash, and I'm the co-creator of Thrive HR Exchange, which is a partnership with Thrive Global Asia Pacific and Monash University, which is bringing well-being into the workplace in Asia Pacific. And I'm delighted and excited to be your host for the session today. Today's masterclass is all about successful collaboration and clear communication, which are the foundations of what we do as leaders. It's about an understanding of what's really going on inside our organization and within our teams. I'm joined today by Professor Richard Hall, the Deputy Dean of Leadership and Executive Education at Monash Business School. He's also the director and facilitator of the Clear Leadership Program at Monash's Business School Executive Education team. Today, Richard's going to explore with us the steps we need to take to lead conversations that increase effectiveness, partnership, collaboration, and organizational learning at work, both physically and in the hybrid workplace. The format for today's session will run for approximately 40 minutes and will be followed by Q&A. Please, as you are thinking of questions throughout the session, feel free to add them into the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We'll also have questions running at the end of the session that we hear from Richard, and we'll take the opportunity to engage in a dialogue with him. So please feel free to share any thoughts that are on your mind and ask questions as they come about. So with that, I'm going to turn over to you, Richard. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steph. Fantastic. Really appreciate you joining us today and looking forward to really interesting dialogue and chat and conversation about the critical role of clarity and clear leadership. I'd like, first of all, to welcome you all to this webinar, this masterclass today. I'd also like to take this opportunity, if I could, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which at least I'm presenting from this afternoon, the peoples of the Kulin Nation. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge First Nations peoples everywhere, wherever you might be joining us from today. Okay, so the critical role of clarity and clear leadership. Thanks for that introduction, Steph. I'm motivated in thinking about this stuff and talking about this stuff by a bunch of key questions. But first, Steph, I'd really like to reflect back. I was just thinking the other day, it must have been about 15, 16 years ago, probably about 2005. I remember, and I used to use this as a bit of a video case, in teaching. And it was actually an interview between Bob Joss, who'd previously been Westpac CEO, and he moved on to Stanford. And he was at Stanford Graduate School of Business, interviewing Jack Welch, legendary CEO of GE, And I remember Bob Joss asking Jack Welch, what are the issues do you think in leadership and management these days? And I'll never forget Jack Welch saying, I've just come from this big presentation in front of about 5,000 managers, senior managers from all sorts of sectors. And I asked them, I said, who in your workplace, who out there has really honest, straight conversations on a regular basis with everyone in your workplace? And he said, I hardly got half a dozen hands that came up. And I've been worrying about this ever since. Why is it so difficult for so many organizations and so many teams to have what we might call straight conversations at work? And so that's kind of part of the problematic that I'm sort of confronting in the big picture. But also more generally, how can we build and sustain strong partnerships in our key relationships? Partnerships often start out great. We're very optimistic about it. There seems to be, once we hit some hurdles and some bumps, we become not so sure about who we're in partnership with. How do we get them back on track? Secondly, how can we create the conditions for effective collaboration? The hard work of collaboration. It's easy to say we're going to collaborate. In practice, it's much harder to do because our interests are often in conflict potentially. How can we most effectively innovate and learn? We all know about, the ideas of VUCA, volatility and uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. Operating conditions are incredibly unpredictable. And I think that the future belongs to those organizations that are fastest to learn, right? And so I think one of the key questions for us is how can we effectively innovate and learn? And how can we then as leaders, as managers, show up to get the best out of our people and the best out of our partnerships? What is it that we can be doing and not doing in this space to make that work? I guess I think about this from an organizational perspective as well. Another kind of key question for me is, we've had a lot of experience with autonomous forms of work organization, and yet I think they often prove to be quite fragile. Why is it that managers seem to often give up on trying to empower employees? It all becomes too difficult, and they sometimes revert to more directive leadership styles. I think often those sort of high empowerment, high involvement, and highly consultative forms of work organization often come under stress, and we often find a reversion, as often happens, I think. So it's making me think then about relationships and the way in which as leaders we can build and sustain effective relationships. And I want to contrast transactional kinds of relationships with partnership-based sorts of relationships. And if we think about transactional relationships, I think about those as being relatively short-term. They're based on a fairly simple exchange. We regard this as a finite, in the moment, complete exchange of value. It tends to be winners and losers in a transaction. Your job is to try and maximize the value that you get, potentially at the expense of another party. We think of this often as a finite kind of a game. We contrast that with relationships that are more based on partnership, where there's a higher degree of mutuality. There's a longer term quality to a partnership. We have direct and indirect exchanges of value that aren't always realized in the moment, but might be realized in the longer term. And hopefully we get synergy where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that complementarity is realized in terms of the learning that we achieve in a partnership. Remember here about Simon Sinek, many of you will be familiar with, talking about the contrast between finite and infinite games. And I can't help but observing that I've previously characterized previous president of the United States, Donald Trump, is very much in the business of seeing everything as a finite game. Everything is a deal for someone like that. Winners and losers, I win, you lose. Contrasting that with more infinite games and infinite approaches to it. So, we want, I think, if possible, our most important relationships to be based on partnership rather than being transactional.
So Richard, if you don't mind, I'd like to just pause there. A couple of questions for you that have come up, and maybe they're helpful to others as well.
Great.
One of the things that we realize is that everyone is super busy, and organizations are becoming increasingly complex, more matrixed, more reporting lines, hard and soft, etc. So obviously, building partnerships takes more time. There's a lot more investment that needs to, or it seems, take more time and therefore more investment. Should we be aiming to partner with everyone or have partnerships with everyone, or should we be selective in how we think about partnerships?
Yeah, it's a really great question to raise, Steph. And I think there is more of an investment in creating a partnership. A lot of that investment up front, if you sustain that and do those little investments along the way, I think it reaps big benefits, is the first point. But no, you're right. We can't afford to be, we don't want to be in partnership with everyone. I'm in exchange and I'm at the 7-Eleven buying a coffee, it's an exchange, it's not a partnership. So, and even at work though, there's a lot of people, you can't be in partnership with everyone. So you need to identify those really key relationships where partnership, which, we define as a relationship between two or more people that feel equally responsible for the achievement of a common purpose. Okay, that's what it is. So do we have a common purpose which we need to, or I want to work with you on in order to achieve this over the longer term? So we're talking here about your key relationships at work in particular, talking about direct reports. If you're part of a leadership or a management team, clearly those people are people you would want to be in partnership with. Those are your direct reports you want to be in partnership with. But you can't afford to sort of, you need to focus your energies and focus the quality of those relationships on those, what we might call key relationships, I think. Yeah.
That's really helpful, that clarification around the mutual accountability. I think the other, word that we use a lot, and we place a lot of value on, and in fact, many companies actually state in their core values that they value collaboration.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the similarities or the differences between collaborating and partnering, or collaboration and partnership?
Yeah, right. Great. I think, yeah, collaboration, as you said, is often said, not always practiced. It gets tricky, it gets difficult. I think partnership is the foundation for effective collaboration. I don't think you can have effective collaboration unless you're in partnership. Partnership is a description of a relationship. Collaboration is a description of how we work together. So that's kind of the doing part, working together to progress or make progress towards a common purpose. So I see effective relationship and partnership as a precondition to doing the hard. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to succeed in the collaborative efforts, but without partnership, I don't think you can effectively collaborate, because you need to be able to disagree. You need to be able to be in conflict constructively and be honest and open about each other's interests in a collaboration, and work through those kinds of issues. And that's much easier to do, I argue only possible to do, where you're in partnership. Yeah. Okay, so
Very helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, great. I'm gonna now switch to sort of, I guess, if that's something about the problem and something about what I'm trying to address here and what we want to achieve, is to say some things about clear leadership, what the practice of clear leadership is like. And I want to start with a story, like telling stories. So here's an image, and I'm going to use this to tell a story. Let's imagine that this is a departmental meeting in any kind of an organization. Let's imagine that down the front there, we've got a manager of a portfolio. Let's say her name is Cho, and Cho is here reporting on somewhat disappointing monthly results. And she's here showing the results and talking about that. She notes that her department, her division is somewhat behind target. You know, she talks in general terms about how she's working with the team to try and turn this around and improve performance. There are some questions from the leadership group around the table, but they're questions of clarification, you know, we want to do this, do that, and there's much nodding, and you know, the boss sort of closes down the conversation, the report, and says, "Well, thank you very much, Cho. You know, we look forward to next month's results and look forward to a turnaround in their results." Now, is that all that's going on in this departmental meeting? Well, no, I don't think that is all that's actually going on. I think there are lots of people around that table that are having internal dialogues with themselves. Sanjaya is one of those around the table there, and she thinks that Cho is still learning the ropes. She's relatively new. She needs some help, but she thinks that Cho doesn't want to admit that she needs some help, and so she's a little wary about getting involved too much with Cho. David's also there. David thinks that Cho is incompetent, that she's not appropriately qualified to do the job. She doesn't deserve to be in the job, and she's totally out of her depth and can't do it at all. Lee's also there, and Lee thinks that Cho is being taken advantage of by key members of her team. You know, Lee knows some of the members of the team and suspect that that's what's going on. They're being a bit lazy, and you know, she knows one or two of them. So what we've got here is the conversation that's going on is very polite, but it's relatively superficial. But you know, people they've got their views, but they're keeping them very much to themselves. I mean, even the boss has got a view about all this. You know, the boss hired Cho after all, and thinks that, well, Cho just needs more time. You know, that's really what's going on here. And so he's going to let her see if she can develop herself and improve a little bit. Now, lots of people have lots of different stories. But they're keeping these stories, as you can see, to themselves. And they've learned that you don't bring these stories up in meetings like this because, well, the boss doesn't like that sort of talk going on. It's a bit embarrassing. And you don't want to speak up in the meeting because you don't want to embarrass. You want to be nice to Cho, of course. But they do, in fact, have their stories. They do, in fact, check them out. But what happens in organisations and meetings like this very much is they check them out outside the departmental meeting. And so, you know, if they're around the coffee machine, someone might ask, well, what did you think of Cho's report this morning? And, you know, maybe one or two will share their real views about what's been going on. But they're certainly not going to discuss it. And if Cho approaches them, they stop that talk all of a sudden, you know, and they remain quiet. So We call this phenomenon in clear leadership interpersonal mush. And you can define interpersonal mush as people interacting with each other on the basis of the stories they've made up about each other that have not checked out directly. And this interpersonal mush can build over time. So we've got people having little private conversations about what's going on. Cho herself is in the midst of this interpersonal mush and doesn't know what's going on. In frustration before the next month meeting, Cho goes to David, right, and says to David, you've got a lot of experience. You know, perhaps you could help out my team and give me some ideas here. I'd really be great if you could meet with my team. And David says, yes, sure, of course. Leave it with me. No problem at all, Cho. But of course, David never gets back to Cho. And David never gets back because he's got a story about Cho, remember, that she's actually incompetent. And he thinks that, yeah, and Cho's incompetent. She just wants me to do her job for her. And I don't think she should have the job at all. So I have no intention of really helping her out at all. Cho, on the other hand, has got a story about David. I've never done anything wrong with David. Why doesn't David kind of cooperate with me? I've only seen him hanging out with men, I must admit. He must have something about female managers. So they've both got stories about each other, and they're acting on the basis of that stories as if they're true. And even the boss can contribute to this interpersonal mush. Next time there's a monthly meeting, Cho just says, I've had enough. I'm going to call this out. She says, I'm really frustrated by the fact that I've asked my colleagues for help, but I'm not getting any help. None has been forthcoming. And the boss, of course, wary of this sort of talk, smooths over the conflict. Well, Cho, I'm sure that your peers are very busy. I'm sure they will help if they can, but ultimately it's your responsibility and your portfolio. Kills off the conversation. Real conversations don't occur. And now everyone's making up stories about the boss as well. Interpersonal mush. Maybe some of you have witnessed some of it and meetings sometimes like that. What happens with interpersonal mush and the consequences of it when we see it is a few things. First of all, we tend to see that subcultures develop. So there's cliques where people you can share your stories with, people you know who you trust and you share those stories with become increasingly common. They're the factions and cliques that you check out your real stories with. People who agree with you typically. Cynicism seems to become more common because the view is, oh, this strategy is never going to work, but there's no point. The boss isn't interested in my views. Why should I speak up about that? Why bother? They're really paying lip service to it. All this sort of organizational cynicism becomes more common. There's no follow through. It's like the story with David. You know, David says, yes, I'll help, but never seems to follow through. And Cho's puzzled. Why are people saying they'll do something, but not actually following through on it? Because they're actually acting on the basis of stories that provide them with explanations why there's no point in following through. And therefore, problem patterns seem to repeat. Have you ever seen that? I heard managers say, I keep on saying this, but I get the same behaviors. I don't know what's going on. Why do these problem patterns repeat? Leaders can't see the consequences of their actions. You know, the boss in that case thinks they're being very clear and very directive and making themselves clear, and yet they don't really know what impact they're having on their direct reports because their direct reports aren't speaking the truth of their experience for a variety of reasons, mainly because the whole organization is involved in this interpersonal mush. And this is a real thing, right? I mean, I remember another case study of Novell back in the 1990s, Steph, when Eric Schmidt, you know, went on to Google and stuff, walked in to do the turnaround at Novell. And he started talking about going to meetings, and he had a term for it at Novell. He called it the Novell nod, right? He'd go into these meetings, he'd say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Everyone would go, yeah, you bet, boss. Go out, nothing had changed. Nothing had happened. It's a form of interpersonal mush, you know. So I think it is a real thing. And I think it also, unfortunately, leads to people becoming increasingly stressed. So, Steph, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just, so I'm completely smiling, and I think it looks like Colin on the Q&A is as well, because I think there are so many anecdotes that you just shared in that one story that resonate with so many of us. And I guess one of the questions that I have, like, interpersonal mush seems to be very, very common. And I wonder, time is precious and people are going from Zoom to Zoom, Teams to Teams, et cetera, et cetera. Don't more people just want straight conversations? What do you think is actually like holding that candor back?
Yeah, I think people do actually want to have straight conversations, and I think that they often shy away from having the straight conversation because they don't know the techniques in having an effective and a constructive straight conversation. Here's what I think often happens, Steph. You say, well, I'm going to have a straight conversation and I'm going to tell you what I really think about something, and what comes forth is my judgment of you. I'm going to really tell you, David, what I think. You're not collaborating with me, blah, blah, blah. You do this and you do that. And defensiveness reigns supreme. That's not for, like, say, my negative others called Kevin. I apologize to any Kevins who are out there. I don't know why it's Kevin, but it's Kevin. If I say to Kevin, you're really annoying. Like, okay, I might find Kevin really annoying, but Kevin's just being Kevin. That's not much value to Kevin. But if I can describe the impact that Kevin's having on me through Kevin's behavior, then we can start to talk about the behavior. I think most people don't do that. Most people, I think, when they think they want to be straight and have that straight conversation, aren't sufficiently skilled to be able to have one which is inviting and enables collaboration instead of pushes people away. In that great book, Crucial Conversations, this is a version of the fool's choice. We think we're trained to either think I can be straight with someone and offend them, or I can choose to be kind. But I ask everyone to remember Brené Brown's excellent comment. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. We need to find skilled ways of being clear. So let's have a look at what that might look like. Interpersonal clarity. So what we want to achieve instead of interpersonal mush is interpersonal clarity. And it's not the same as making myself clear. Okay, so this is leveraging off your point there, Steph. I'll give you another example. I'll tell you a story about making myself clear. I'm really good at this. I know how to make myself clear, and I'm good at being really, really explicit, telling people what they should do, but that of course means that those people, when I'm very directive and authoritarian, doesn't invite much engagement. Or being open and honest, right? What I'm not talking about here is being open and honest. I can be open and honest, I'll tell you what I really think, like before. But as I say, there's judgments about you that tend to come out. So I'll tell you a quick making myself clear story. It's completely hypothetical, but something like this may well very happen to me. Let's say Annabelle is a peer of mine and Bob is a direct report. Annabelle comes into my office and says, Richard, you won't believe it. Bob's done it again. Bob's put out an advertisement there. We had this agreement that every time a piece of promotion comes out, then the logos associated with my part of the business must be shown on that. They're not there. Bob's done it again. I can't believe it. You've got to fix it. You got to talk to Bob. He's your direct report. Now, I'm an experienced manager. My job is to fix problems. I go, okay, let me check this out first. I said, Annabelle, have you spoken to Bob about it? Yeah, I emailed Bob. No response. Can you believe it? He hasn't even responded to my email. All right, Annabelle, so I'm a good fix-it manager. So what do, Steph? I go down to Bob. And I say, Bob, I can't believe it. This has happened. I've heard from Annabelle that you haven't published the logos as part of the advertisement. This has got to stop. We've got an agreement. This isn't good enough anymore. I don't want to hear any excuses. I know that you think it's a waste of your time. I know what's going on here, Bob. I just need you to fix it, really, and get back to Annabelle, okay? Storm out. Job done. Brilliant. Fixed it. No problem. What are the consequences of that anecdote? How's Bob feeling? Bob's not going to feel like being much in partnership. Bob's not feeling really good. I'm still frustrated and annoyed. Annabelle's dismayed, doesn't know what's going on. But I think I've done my job. What about, though, if I took a different approach here and started to think about our experiences? What if, rather than trying to jump in and fix things, I instead first decide that I'm going to try and understand Bob's experience? I've got my experience. Annabelle's got her experience. What about Bob's experience? So what about if I take a different approach and instead I ask Bob about his experience after I tell Bob about my experience? And I say, Bob, it's come to my attention that you published an ad that Annabelle's been to see me about, and it didn't include Annabelle's logos on it. I think that might be for a number of different reasons. I think you might have forgotten. I think it's possible that you might not think it's her business to do that. I also think that we had an agreement that it would be done. I also think that that's fair enough, that we do have those logos appearing in the ad. I feel somewhat embarrassed by this situation. I want us to have good relationships with Annabelle. I also want you to be able to continue to publish the advertising material that you want to. I'd really like to know what your experience is. And Bob says, you know what, thanks, Richard. That's really interesting. I wanted to talk to you about that. He said, because the opportunity came up for the advertisement. We had to meet a distress rate deadline on Friday afternoon. I got in touch with Annabelle's team, and Annabelle's team couldn't supply the logos in time because they were being updated. I said, I'll have to run with the ad as it is, and next time, hopefully, we can get the logos in there. And I said, wow, okay. And did you tell all this to Annabelle? And he says, actually, no, I didn't, because what I got from Annabelle was this short, sharp email, and I don't know why Annabelle can't come down and talk to me about that, so I've explained this complex scenario to her instead of responding. Bingo. All of a sudden, I've got a completely different picture about what's going on here. My stories about Bob aren't true. I'm acting on them as if they are true, but something else is going on. So now we've got a communication issue, which we can work on and fix. So I can go and tell Annabelle, could you go and see Bob to talk about that? Yeah, I can. Problem goes away because I'm interested, first of all, not in acting on the judgments I'm making, but in understanding Bob's experience. So the key here is, first of all, to know what my experience is and be able to describe it. Secondly, to know what your experience is and be able to understand that and be able to tell the difference between those two things. And that, I think, is the first step, and the most important step is understanding our experiences, our own experiences, and everyone has a different experience. What we need to do to get interpersonal clarity is get clear about each other's experience. Lying behind that, I guess, is this concept of self-differentiation that I want to take a moment to talk about and describe. And the idea of self-differentiation is that what we need to be in these key partnership relationships that we're in is we need to try to be separate from, but connected to others simultaneously. And what that really means is recognizing that I have my experience, that you have your experience, and I want you to understand my experience, and I'm curious about your experience as well. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to try and fix your experience for you. I'm going to let you have your experience. You need to respect my experience, and I can respect your experience, and recognize that they're different experiences before trying to fix them. I need to recognize that even though I think everyone's having the same experience I am, we're all having our own individual experiences. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable, because if the experience you're having of me is less than perfect, that can be somewhat difficult. But rather than trying to fix that and change that, I really need to try and let you have that experience. And what we need to guard against is the two sort of alternate states from being differentiated. Very often the problem is we're fused with another person, particularly if they're a direct report. What do I mean by fusion? Fusion is really an anxiety management strategy. I want you to manage my experience for me as an anxiety management strategy, or alternatively, you want me to manage your experience for you. And this is very common. I'll give you an example. Just say Monash, another one of my direct reports, walks into my office and says, hey, Richard, I'm really worried about the presentation that's coming up on Thursday afternoon. And I go, I'm busy. And, you know, and I say to Monash, I say, oh, Monash, don't worry about it. You'll be great. It's fine. Yeah, you're really good at this sort of thing. You know, what am I actually saying? I'm saying, Monash, go away. You're making me anxious. I don't want you to make me anxious. I want you to, you know, I want it to be fixed, and I want this to go away. Now, I can convince myself I'm caring, you know, for Monash, and I'm bolstering up, but actually I might be coming from a place which is actually fused. She's making me anxious. I don't like that experience she's having. I'm going to try and fix that experience. Some of us might be familiar with the concept of fusion on the home front. If you have a significant other, very often we find ourselves in a fused relationship with that. You know, I go home, I'm very attuned to my wife's mood, you know, and if the experience she's having is one that makes me anxious, what do? I want to fix it. Oh, you should have done this. Oh, you should do that. Oh, you shouldn't worry about it. It's a fused reaction. Is that really what the person wants? Do they want to be dismissed, told what to do? Probably not. What they probably want to do is have you understand their experience. And so we can reflect and talk about that in a more constructive way. So fusion is one of the things we want to go to get. The other one at the other end of the spectrum is to be disconnected, right? And being disconnected is where managers and leaders, they're not thinking about another person's experience. They're not thinking about the impact they might be having on their experience. They just don't even know, they're not caring about it. They're disconnected. And I think this is one of the things that's happened to us with email and virtual communication, and it's amplified, I think, by working from home, is it's very easy for us to be disconnected. We're separated from this environment here. I don't know the impact that I'm having. I fix things through email. I send out an email. Oh, my job is done. You know, I've told people all this kind of stuff. Do I know the impact that's no, I don't. Do I care? No, I don't even care. I don't even know what impact it's having on them. It's being disconnected. So we need to find that point of self-differentiation, of being separate from but connected to others simultaneously. And I really think that's the heart of it. And I think that translates into what it can look like in terms of leadership, what self-differentiated leadership looks like. And I think what we want to aspire to is thinking about some of these particular qualities. So if you have that, you know, being separate from but connected to others, you want to be in partnership, what's it look like? Well, first of all, it means I'm aware of my own experience in the sense that I'm able to be conscious about what I'm observing, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and what I'm wanting in the moment, which is not easy to do. But first of all, being aware of my own experience. Secondly, I'm able to describe, I'm descriptive, right? I'm able to describe my own experience in a way that makes it understandable to others. So rather than resorting to the judgments I was talking about earlier, I'm going to pass judgment on you and you're going to get defensive, or we're going to get into an argument and it's going to pull us apart, I'm going to find a way to describe my experience, which is my experience. And then critically, absolutely, I've got to be curious about the experience of others. I've got to be curious about your experience. Very descriptive about mine. And I really want to learn from your experience. I'm not going to try and fix your experience. I'm going to let you have it, but I am interested in it. I am curious about it. I do want to know what impact I might be having on you. What you do with that is your business, because I treat you as a grown-up adult who's able to exercise their own choice, but I am interested in that impact. And then the leadership bit, I guess, is to know the scope of my authority and be able to explain it to others about how I exercise that authority and how you can be involved in different decisions. And that's a really important part of saying, yeah, you have your experience, I have my experience, but I can be clear about what I've got to do, what I'm responsible for, what standards are expected here. And here's how you have a voice and a role to play in that exercise of that authority. And they're aware of their mental maps and they're prepared to hold them lightly. So this is a part of being descriptive, I think, as a leader, as a self-differentiated leader. Let me tell you what's going on in my head. As I say, leaders have two choices. You can either be descriptive about what's going on in your head, or you can let people make up stories about what's going on in your head. Think about our example of departmental meeting. People are making up all sorts of different, especially about bosses. They're making up stories about leaders the whole time. What are they thinking? Why don't you be transparent about that? Why don't you say, here's my mental map. Here's how I see the world. Here's my operating theory. Here's how it's working for me. This is why I'm reaching this conclusion. Why don't you come and have a look at that mental map? And why don't you show me your mental map? How do you see it? Where have I got that wrong? Because I've got smart people that work with me. I want to know what their mental map is, and I want to share mine. And if they've got a better one, I want to appropriate some of that so we can reach a better decision. rather than these managers that run around the place and you're second guessing, what do they mean by that? Why would they be doing that? I wonder what that is. And they're willing to share those mental maps, as I say, and they're open to others' maps because they're being descriptive and they're able to talk about those things in a way which is non-judgmental and it's relevant. I think that's a much more constructive form of being open. So look, sorry, Stephanie, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say there's so much here that resonates. And I think you and I have talked previously as well about some of these points about the qualities of a self-differentiated leader. And before I jump into questions, because we've got some in the Q&A, and I would encourage anyone else who's got some questions to add them there. But one of the things we talked about is the whole principle of ABC. So always be curious. And I think that we hear that from you and curious about the experience of others. And I think what becomes really important for us as leaders as we're developing is we start to develop the skills about being curious and asking good questions. Then we actually need to follow that up by listening deeply to what we're hearing and then responding or taking action appropriately so that we're curious, we're listening, we're demonstrating empathy, and even better yet, we're able to demonstrate compassion because we actually understand what's on people's minds and we're taking that appropriate action. I think that comes through the self-differentiated leader and the levels of self-awareness that you've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also that very, really important point you raised there, Steph, about the compassion as well. And it speaks to the full scope of our experience and being descriptive and curious about all aspects of our experience. And so one of the things we look at in the program is a thing called the experience cube and how to use it. And we look at ways in which we can then be aware of what we've been talking about here, aware of my own experience, descriptive about that experience, to be sort of transparent and open about our mental maps and what's going on for us, to be curious, as you said, ABC, and to be appreciative, how to hold others in a way that helps them be the best that they can. And that fullness of experience includes, as I said before, observations, thoughts, feelings. Okay, so, and this is a controversial point for some. Well, what role is there for emotions at work? They clearly play on people's behavior massively. We need to be concerned, interested, and curious about people's emotions and emotional responses. And that is the heart, I think, to being compassionate, to sort of, but you also need to be descriptive about your own emotions. And in the program, we talk about how to be descriptive of your emotions rather than just expressing your emotions and being fused with them. So often when we're very fused and reactive, we just move into expressing our emotions. But if we can find a way to be descriptive about our emotions and recognize people's emotions, that's the secret to being both compassionate but also constructive, I think, as a leader. Yeah.
I think that's spot on. I think it's also we're in a place, as you started out the discussion today, where it continues to be highly ambiguous. And so just that level of vulnerability is increasingly important because we don't have a fixed end state to what we're experiencing these days.
Yeah. Okay, so Steph, would you like to move into question mode? I might just stop sharing.
Yeah. So I see some questions here. So I think I'm just going to go kind of in order. Some are comments, some are questions. And so first question, within organizations, often success is based on meeting KPIs that are based on budget and time. How can we build in the partnerships as a KPI? Partnerships take time, trust, and respect.
Yeah, that's a beauty. How do we build that in? So it's hard, isn't it, of course, to try to measure quality of partnerships. But I think the one thing that organizations and teams should think about doing is finding ways to reward and recognize learning, and in particular, organizational learning, okay, which does show up in terms of the capacity to be able to innovate. So some of those innovations, organizations can do that. What proportion of our revenue is coming from things we haven't done before or whatever it might be. You can build in some meaningful, hard-edged KPIs, stuff like that is dependent on our capacity to learn. And one of the messages I think here is, you know, we need to start to build organizational cultures where learning is seen as a sign of competence. Yeah. So often talk about this program clear leadership about being leading, learning in the midst of performing. Yeah, performing super important. Absolutely. Holding people accountable, meeting your KPIs. Yeah. But one of those is our capacity to learn, or are we learning? Right. So I think that's what you can build in there rather than trying to build in a measure of quality of partnerships per se. That'd be my thought on that one, I think, Steph.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. I completely agree. I think other things that can be done is building in, just like we do in performance reviews, whether the MBOs, OKRs, whatever form or fashion you use, we talk a lot about not only what someone has done or delivered or accomplished, but also how they've done it.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that we can actually measure in, so for the person who asked the question, you can look at in the partnership, establishing measures of success that are not only about the what, but they're also about the how. So that can be, you could get you could get satisfaction surveys, you could get partnership surveys, you can use different things to also capture that.
Yeah, and I think that does mean, I don't know if you're seeing this, Steph, I'd like your views on this, but organizations have become a little tired with just relying on the hard, super measurable, quantitative measures only. You know, it's like the sort of the reign of KPIs and strict competencies. Yep, they absolutely have their place, but I think increasingly we need to balance that with more qualitative, longer term, more subtle kinds of measures and indicators here. I think that's important when we're trying to achieve these complex outcomes, especially around innovation and learning. Yeah, but they're really good. They're really good thoughts too.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also the piece very much about the continuous learning. I think well-being is another area that we need to be embedding behaviors into, and behavioral expectations of our managers and our employees. So there's a lot changing in this space. Some comments here that support that. Another question here is, how do you deal with the internal ambition of team members, individuals who think and strive to improve their personal advantage, which leads to division within the team? It divides trust, honesty, and increases defensiveness. When do you call this out?
Yeah, well, you call it out as soon as you can. All right. So another message here is, of course, these skills around being able to have these kind of what we'll call learning conversations around this, where we're getting clear about each other's experience, that they needn't be terribly time consuming. They needn't be very long. If you've got a structure and a set of skills in place and people understand what's going on, then you can call that out, you know, and you're using that sort of structure I spoke about earlier. Here's what I'm seeing in your behavior. I think this is what is going on. I'm feeling really concerned about the impact that I see that having on others. And I want to have you excel and develop and succeed in a way that sustains the partnership and the team here. Tell me about your experience of all this. And sometimes where you find, to address that specific question, I think it's where you've got an individual team member who's very driven by their outcomes and they're going to work independently, maybe sometimes the costs of other team members, right? And so there can be an issue about, we could clarify that if we understand that's what's really going on, rather than just assuming that's what's going on, like the story. You have your learning conversation, yeah, that's what it is. This is actually a disagreement about goals, you know, and it's actually about, do we have an issue here about our common purpose? All right. Remember before I said, I think partnership is about where we feel equally responsible for the achievement of a common purpose. Here's my understanding of common purpose. We need to work together as a team to get these team objectives done. Here's the impact I'm seeing your behavior having. That's my mental map. What's going on. How do you see that? And you need to go, okay, this is our common purpose. We're disagreeing about common purpose, then there's going to be consequences for that because I'm going to insist on this common purpose. So that's the point at which I think you then do call it out. You do explain what are the consequences. You say, here's the scope of my authority and here's what's going to happen. I need to see these behaviors. You know, so you still got to be a leader, a manager, and you've got to call that behavior, but do it on the basis of an understanding of each other's experience first, because otherwise you could get it wrong, bad consequences.
Yeah,
that'd be my best. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about how to align that, because that can be a tricky one, right?
Yeah, I think again, it's about how you have the conversation in a respectful manner. but the conversation needs to be had. So I completely agree with you. Absolutely agree. Another one here. People take direct conversations a lot of the time that you are directive. Oop, I just lost it. The proven leadership when dealing with senior leadership is if you can influence them. How do you manage direct conversations in this situation with senior leaders and leaders at the same levels of you? Okay, so how do you have direct conversations with your peers and with your management?
Okay, so I think the first thing is it's easier to have with your peers or your direct reports. Okay, but they need to, in all cases, people need, in a sense, to know what you're doing here, you know. And I think the way, and again, program, we sort of talk a lot about how you frame these conversations and how you make it clear, in a nutshell, what your intent is. Okay, so I'm stepping into something about, I want to tell you about my experience. I want to hear about your experience. You know, what's all this about? What do you want to do? But if you can frame it up by saying, you know, here is my intent, right? I can see that some stuff that I've done seems to have had an impact on you. I'm not happy about what that impact is, but this is just a story I'm making up. Could you help me out here? I just want to check out my story with you, and you can tell me what I've got right and what I've got wrong. Most people in that situation are up for that kind of a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I'm inviting you in here. I want you to help me understand this better. My intent is genuinely to learn about what's going on, right? Not like, I got to tell you why you're the, no, yeah. I'm stepping into these conversations all the time, Steph, and I actually know that they're the problem. And I actually know that I've got to fix them. But I play this trick on myself. I say, hey, remember the clear leadership stuff. Let's just pretend that they've got a different experience from mine. You know what? I never fail to learn something from that when I step in and have that. I go, wow, I did not know that. I did not know that you would see it that way. I don't know. Yeah. I think it's crazy, but I'm not going to judge that. I'm just going to go, okay, that's where you're coming from. And I can do that with managers, my manager. I go, I just want to check this out, and here's the story I'm making up about that. And that's not too confronting. But where people don't want to be descriptive about that, where you do perhaps have a leader or a manager and you're trying to manage up in this way and they're very confronted by that, then it is very difficult. You're not going to be able to achieve that unless you can send that manager on a clear leadership program. You know, I mean, unless they're prepared to be descriptive and open and share their mental maps, then it is very tough going. But I think you can coach people into that situation gently by saying, I want to invite you into this conversation so I can learn something. Most people go, oh, okay, you want to learn from me? Sure, I'll give you the benefit, you know, and then you can tell me more. Don't give you my judgment. Tell me more about what you saw and what you think about that and what you feel about it. So you can use that sort of experience to coach your manager by probing and, as you said before, asking those good questions to learn more about where they're at. And that often can work.
Yeah. No, great feedback, great suggestions as well. You sort of touched on this, but there might be opportunity to elaborate. What does a learning organization look like when functioning in a way to foster this interpersonal relationship environment? So how do they intersect together to function optimally?
Intersect together, the learning organization. I'm not sure what's.
I think learning organization with one that is functioning and are performing.
Yeah, right. So how do they interact together? Yeah, okay. So that's right, because I think if I understand this correctly, then a high-performing organization, people are kind of getting on with it, they know what they're doing, they're achieving great results, okay? But then we go, well, if we're learning, then yeah, this is part of it. And it's sort of this way in which we've come to construct and make assumptions about what learning is. You know, I always like that phrase when you sort of say, where's so-and-so? Oh, they're not at work today, they're training. Right? Like there's this bifurcation. You're either working or you're learning, right? And that's part of what I think we've got to break down here, rather than saying there's an operational part of the organization, there's a learning part of the organization. Operating effectively is learning. And I think we can we're closer to getting that these days. Yeah. With all this talk about the need for innovation, the need for change. And we're seeing, you know, most recently in the last couple of years, that's kind of really real here. But how is it that we can learn in the midst of performing? And that's what performance means. Performance means getting better at what we're doing. You know, if you look at the great traditions, Kaizen or whatever it is, or lean manufacturing, you know, they've all got learning that's built in as part of the process of improving efficiency. So this stuff, not only matters, it is an imperative to be able to do both things at the same time, to perform and to learn as we go. And if you can't do that, then you'll end up like Kodak or what, if you're not prepared to do that. So what's the organization look like? The other thing I want to say about that, organizations and teams there's a high level of trust. Mm-hmm. Not everything goes right all the time, but when something doesn't go right, people are totally fine. They'll stick their hand up and said, yeah, I did that. This is what went wrong. This is why I think it went wrong. That was something that I did or a decision I made. And it's not me. That doesn't define me, but I'm taking responsibility for it. People are open about that sort of stuff because they're not going to get punished for it. In fact, on the contrary, they're going to go, okay, that's straight. That's great. We know what's going on here. We can work to fix it now, rather than hiding your mistakes behind there. So the learning organization that's performing is one in which there is interpersonal clarity. People can talk up, they can object, have a different view, because that's okay. I'm not going to get shot down for that. I'm not having the experience I have to have. I'm allowed to view that. And the boss is going to say, I'm going to make a call on that. I've heard that. So I know where I stand with the boss. They're really straight about that. And that actually, once you have that culture, you can get stuff done faster. You know what I mean? Because there becomes a level of trust. Yep, I can trust them. They're going to follow through. I don't have to waste all my time making up stories, second guessing what's in the boss's head. And so you see in organizations that have this kind of culture that they're performing and they're learning and they're having quick conversations, you're just checking in. Something not land right there. Tell me about that. It's okay. I can handle it.
Yeah, that's excellent. We've got a couple minutes left.
Okay.
Only a couple minutes left and a couple more questions. I'm going to dive into a couple that are looking for really specific feedback.
Okay.
As all of this has been, but they're quite poignant. You'll see what I mean. How do you develop being a self-differentiated leader in a team that is not aware? I think actually you touched on that one, Richard. You just touched on that one 2 questions ago. What is an example of being descriptive about emotions?
What's an example of being descriptive about emotions? At the moment, I'm feeling nervous because I'm giving this answer in front of, a couple of hundred people, and I'm finding it hard not to feel self-conscious, but I'm going to call that out. What I want to do is be as authentic as I can in the situation. And, I hope that people can understand that. I'm telling you what I'm feeling right now. It's not defining me. I'm being descriptive of it rather than acting in a nervous fashion. It'll help you sometimes be able to name that, to be able to call it, to be able to be there. And if you can do that in the moment sometimes, rather than acting on the emotion, then it is, when people they look a bit more vulnerable, and we often think, oh, I don't want to be seen to be vulnerable. But it actually, if you think about it, it draws other people in. They're going, wow, they're being straight.
Yeah, this is coming up all the time in discussions that I'm in, particularly as we're talking about mental well-being and mental health, and the importance of role modeling leaders, not only at the executive level, but all throughout the organization, because just the demonstration of that authenticity and the vulnerability will help people feel more comfortable sharing what's on their mind. So potentially working their way through that in that mush. But even just being able to say, you've been in and out of lockdown we've all been in and out of lockdown for the last number of months, but I'm standing up here in front of you today, hoping that what I'm going to tell you is that we're coming back to work next week. But I realized that things could change. And it makes me uncomfortable because I'm trying to plan my kids' schedule, et cetera, et cetera. So I love that just real kind of vulnerability and the encouragement to behave that way.
Another
question, what is your advice on improving the listening skills? How do you manage an employee who is challenging to work with, perhaps because they're not a good listener?
Perhaps
challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, so, challenging employees can be different, but okay. So if they're really contesting, I mean, how do you do listening? Okay, you listen also through the cube. So in the program, teach you how to listen effectively through the cube. So good listening. If you're ever caught out and you want to be in that situation, the bad listener hears something. That's my story. I got the solution. I'm going to jump in and fix it, correct it, explain why they're wrong. Stop. Whatever you're doing, if you're finding yourself in that situation, my trick is ask another question. That's interesting. Tell me more about that. Even if it's something I don't want to hear, I go, yep, I'm just going to, they're really angry at me. Okay, tell me more. And what are you thinking about that? And what made you think that? And I can see her feeling that. Tell me more about what you feel. And that will help people be descriptive rather than just act it out. So listen through the cube. And stop trying to fix what they're saying and instead probe for more information.
Excellent. I am conscious that we are at time. And I want to give everybody back 60 seconds to at least take a break between now and your next Teams meeting, Zoom meeting, etc. So Richard, do you want to just close off on this?
Yeah, I'll just close off quickly on that. Just if you want to learn more about clear leadership, you can scan that there. We've got some programs coming up, Monash Business School or online, of course, in the modern era. And thank you most of all for all of you who've given you your most valuable resource, your time. I hope that you've had fun, learned something, and I hope we can continue to engage. Tell your friends about the upcoming masterclasses. Stephanie, great to see you.